Welcome to Lesson 14 and Through the New Testament in Ancient Greek for Absolute Beginners. My name is Helena Stay, and I'm your guide as we read through the New Testament in its original beautiful language, the language of ancient Greece, which coincidentally was called Hellenistei. Because each lesson will build on previous lessons, be sure to start with Lesson 1. Today in Lesson 14, we will be reading through Matthew 6, verses 16 through 24, which is a continuation of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, when he talks about proper fasting, treasures in heaven, and the lamp of the body. And as we go through these verses, we're going to be talking about 4 new verbs, nηστεύω, γίνομαι, ἀφανίζω, and φαίνω. We're also going to do a big overview of all the various verb forms, or at least the most common in the New Testament. So the tenses, PIA, the moods, and 2 other non-finite forms are ἐσάμνυπ, and the voices are amp. We're also going to talk about the present indicative active and the future indicative active of ἐιμί. And then we're going to do a little bit of an overview to make sure we clarify on the words that sound like a. There's actually quite a few, and they all have different meanings, but they all sound like a. And then we'll talk about a few adjectives. So let's get started. First, Matthew chapter 6, verses 16 through 18. Hatande nηστεύετε με γίνεσθε hos hoi hypokritai. Skutropoi ἀφανίζουσιν gar ta prosopa auton. Hapos phanosin tois anthropos mnesteuantes amen lego humin apekusin ton misthon auton. Sude nηστεύων αλέψαι σου ten κεφαλήν kai ta prosopon su nύψαι. Hapos me phanes tois anthropos nηστεύων, αλλά to patri su to en to kruphaio kai ha pater su ha blepon en to kruphaio apodose soi. The first things I want to talk about is what we called the lexical forms of these verbs. Remember that when we talk about nouns and adjectives, when you look those up in a lexicon, you look for the lexical form because nouns and adjectives take all different forms depending on their gender, their number, and also their cases. Remember, the cases are nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative. Same thing with verbs. Verbs are going to have all different conjugations, so the tenses and moods, and even when you get to the participles, they're going to have gender as well. So when they take all these different forms, it's hard to recognize them. But you can always refer, at least in BibleHub.com, to the Strong's number to find the lexical form, which is usually your first person singular present tense form. So here, this verb nηστεύετε, we know from these little letters down here, the code is verb, present tense, subjunctive mood, active voice, second person, plural. Now, you can also find out more about this verb if you click on 3522, which takes you to the Strong's number. And in this case, you can find out it means too fast. We use the infinitive in English as our lexical form. And the original word is also called the lexical form, is νηστεύω, I fast. It's the present indicative active form, first person singular. Now, I noticed that this is coming from νηστεύς. So if you look that up, νηστεύς, ha, or νηστείας, hey, so female and male, is an adjective that means not eating. So a man who is not eating, you would say ha νηστεύς. And a woman who's not eating is he νηστείας. So To fast is similar, νηστεύω. All right, here it's a little bit different. We'll learn subjunctive in the future, but it's very similar to present, νηστεύετε, except you have a long vowel here. So that's just one thing to look out for in the subjunctive. The vowel becomes longer. So a regular epsilon will become an eta. All right, let's look at the next verb over. This one, if you click through on 1096, comes from the lexical form γίνομαι. So this is one of those middle-only verbs that end with omai. So remember we did omai, atai, amatha, esthe, ontai. Those are the endings we looked at with luo. So luamai, lue, luatai, luamatha, luesthe, luontai. And don't worry if you don't remember all that. But this is one of those middle-only verbs which are usually intransitive. In this case, it means to come into being, to happen, to become. So there's no direct object. There's sometimes what they call a predicate nominative. You can become something else, but you're actually not doing an action. It's something that's intransitive. It's just, this is kind of an equivalent verb, just like you would use to be. All right, so let's talk about γίνεσθε. Here we have, it's a verb, of course, present tense, and then the M is for imperative. An imperative mood is a command. So do not be like the hypocrites. And in this case, it's both middle and passive. So because γίνομαι is a middle-only verb, it takes the same form as passive. So that's why they have M/P. All right, let's move on to the next one. So this verb over here is ἀφανίζω, and the meaning is either to make unseen or to destroy. And in this case, the best translation is to disfigure. So to make your face look disfigure. So in those days when somebody fasted, it was impressive because they were being very holy and obedient to God. So people wanted to be noticed. So they would disfigure their face, make it look like they're really sick and, oh, they're hungry. They would look really gloomy. So that was basically an act that they put on to make it look like they were so great. So they might appear. We'll get to that verb next. So ἀφανίζουσιν. We talked about the endings of the third person plural in the present indicative active, usin, like luo, lues, lue, luamen, luete, and then luusin. Here we have ἀφανίζουσιν. So you just take off the omega and you add usin. All right, so that one is a pretty straightforward because it's present. Here we have another subjunctive, and this is from the word fαίνω. You can notice this PH for the phi, fan. In English, we have a lot of words like phantom, something that appears, that is not real, but it appears like a ghost, is a phantom. So φαίνω is to bring to light, to cause to appear. All right, so here you want to appear like you're fasting. So you make yourself look gloomy and you kind of disfigure your face. So you just look kind of yucky. All right, so that makes themselves appear. And this is passive. You can see that with a ASP. So it's aorist. We'll get to that later. We haven't gotten to aorist yet. Subjunctive. And it's passive. So they're making themselves appear. It's like almost like a middle idea here because they're doing it to themselves. So hopos, so that indicates in like a goal or a purpose. Usually for those types of things, you're going to use the subjunctive. All right, so we'll talk more about the subjunctive, but that's why this is in the subjunctive. And this O is actually the long form of oo. All right, so in the present, you have the omega upsilon, and then in the subjunctive, it changes to the long omega. So it's kind of just a little bit of a foretaste of the subjunctive. Whenever you see these longer vowels, then you're gonna think subjunctive, especially if it's in a situation where whenever or so that or if. All right, so that they might appear as if they were fasting. right, this here is a participle. I'm going to talk about participles here with the same verb. Nηστεύω, own in ancient Greek is very similar to ing in English. So fasting is something to describe someone who is fasting. It's kind of like an adjective. That's what a participle is. It's a verb that acts as an adjective. So in this case, you can tell it's a present participle. In English, it's also a present participle, and that ing is present. A past participle in English would be something like has fasted. Usually you see the ed, or has gone. That's an irregular. So with a participle, and we'll learn this in the future, so I'm just giving you a little foretaste. You're going to have the case, the gender, and the number, just like you do for adjectives. So this is nominative masculine singular to match the subject you. If you are fasting, so in this case, in general, it's a male. You reference as male. So nominative masculine singular to match your nominative you. All right, this last verb is another present participle that's active, nominative masculine singular. So just look at those owns. Not every word that ends with own is a present participle, but a lot of times it is. And then up here we have a present participle that's plural. So instead of own, it's ontes. Own is also very common for genitive plural nouns and adjectives. So own is kind of those just little thing to keep in mind. When you see own, think present participle, masculine singular, or often genitive plural noun or adjective. All right, this is my most colorful slide so far, and it's my attempt to summarize the 6 main tenses that you're going to see. There's also one other tense, the future perfect, but very rare in the New Testament. We have present tense, which is prune, and I got these colors and their hex codes from Wikipedia, so this is the accurate prune color. We have imperfect, which is imperial red here. We have aorist, which is another way of saying past, the past tense, and that's army green. And then we have future, which is fuchsia. Perfect. P was already taken by present, so we're going with R, matching the same abbreviations as they use in Bible Hub to keep it simple. And this is periwinkle. And then we have pluperfect, which is plum, and goes with the L because we already used P. So we have piafurl, if that helps you remember it. Present, imperfect, aorist, future, perfect, and pluperfect. Now, each mood has some of these tenses. Not every mood has these tenses, so I'm just going to talk about that in the future, but just know that these are all different moods, and they can have one or more of these 6 tenses. So the first mood, we actually have 4 moods, and these are called non-finite verb forms, but they're also in the second position in that kind of code that Bible Hub gives, with the tense first and then one of these letters second. So we have indicative, which is indigo here, subjunctive, which is sunglow, optative, which is orange, imperative, maroon, and I put in the M is what they use instead of I, because I is taken by indicative. Infinitive, which is our first non-finite verb form, and we'll discuss that in the future. This color is called inchworm, I like that. And then we have participles, which is our verb that acts as an adjective, and that's peach for participle. Right, so just remember M and N is imperative and infinitive. It's a little bit different. And I remember those as esomnip, indicative, subjunctive, optative, imperative, infinitive, and participle. Now we've seen examples of all of these so far, but optative we haven't seen yet, and it occurs first in Luke 1, verse 38. Optative indicates a wish, and we don't really have it in English, but we would say something like, oh, I wish it were so, or wish it were the case, or may God cause it to happen, that type of thing. And in the King James Version, when it's in the negative, you also can say God forbid is a good translation. So for example, me genoita means God forbid, or may it not happen, may it not happen. So this is kind of rare, but every once in a while you'll see it in the New Testament. So I'm just going to mention it. And then your voice is whether the subject is doing the action of the verb, which is active, whether the subject is basically doing something that involves itself, like something that is self-affecting. And a lot of times verbs of motion and verbs of when you're doing something to yourself, like washing yourself or dressing yourself, those will be in the middle. And then some verbs are always in the middle. And those are usually intransitive verbs, like what we talked about last time with proseuchomai. And then passive verbs are when the subject is receiving the action. So instead of I release, which would be active, I am released. That's passive, the passive form of release. All right, so these are all of my colors and my little like mnemonic memory tips. But we're going to go into a lot more detail in the future about these. So let's go ahead and move on to the next verse. Matthew 6, verses 19 through 21. Me thesaurisete humin, thesaurus epites geis, hapu seis kai brosis ἀφανίσαι, kai hapu kleptai diarususin kai kleptusin. Thesaurisete de humin, thesaurus en urano, hapu ute seis ute brosis ἀφανίσαι, kai hapu kleptai u diarususin, ude kleptusin. Hapu gar estin ha thesaurasu, eke estai kai he cardiasu. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at these verb forms. We have do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. So store up here, this is an imperative. That's the reason for the M in the middle. It's Jesus giving a command, don't store up. And it is present active, second person plural. So you can tell by this ete that it's you all. Do not you all store up treasures on earth. All right, let's look at this one. This is the same verb that we heard just in the last slide about the hypocrites who disfigure their faces to look all, sad and gloomy and fasting. So ἀφανίσαι is our present indicative active third person singular of ἀφανίζω. In this case, it is destroy. The moth, seis, and the rust, brosis, destroy treasures on earth. ἀφανίσαι. All right. And notice when you have two things like moth and rust, you still sometimes will use this third person singular because you're just talking about each of them. The moth destroys, the rust destroys. All right. And now we have diarususin, and that means to break in. So diaruso. Usin, notice is the third person plural ending for the present indicative active. All right, and notice also kleptai is thieves. One thief would be ha kleptos, and one or more thieves, the nominative masculine plural, is kleptai. All right, and similarly, you have to steal is klepto. So we have from that in English, we have kleptomaniac. So kleptusin means they steal. In this case, thieves steal. So that's why it's third person plural, present indicative active. And then here, same as up above, store up. So this one is don't store up. Remember, may goes with non-indicative moods, like anything besides indicative, and in this case, imperative. Here, it's an imperative. So you're going to have, and it's positive. So it doesn't have the may. Of course, this is something we should do. Do store up, however, and de here could mean and, but because it's a contrast, we would translate that as however. For yourselves, dative, thesaurus, you'll recognize thesaurus from the Magi who brought the treasures to the baby Jesus. So we already seen that word before. All right. Ute, neither, neither. And then ἀφανίζω. Ἀφανίζω is another, again, destroy. And they don't break in. And now this is indicative, so it takes u before it. U. Diarrheususin and kleptusin. So hapu, gar, remember, is postpositive, so it goes on at the second word in the sentence. Estin, is. This is the third person singular, present indicative active of the verb ἐμί, which means to be. So where your treasure is, there will your heart also be. And then estai is the future indicative middle third person singular. So we're going to actually cover that soon. So FIM, future indicative middle. So I said we were going to cover it soon. Here we are. So this is to remind you, we've already covered ἐμί, but a little reminder, present tense, indicative mood, active voice. In fact, there is nothing but the active voice for the verb to be, because you can't really be passive. I guess you can be yourself, but you don't really, it's not really a verb like that, where it's more of an equating verb, where you and whatever follows the verb to be are equal, are designated as equal. So it's followed by what's called a predicate nominative. All right, so ἐμί, estin, esmen, este, ἐσύν, or ac. Usually this new is there. All right, now for the future, and this will help us learn the future for other verbs. But the interesting thing about ἐμί is it takes these middle endings. So usually the future, you do have this sigma. We're going to talk about the future in the future, but just remember there is generally a sigma. So es, omai, es, a, estai, esamatha, eseste, esantai. This should look familiar. This is from the previous lesson where we looked at the passive. Luamai, I was loosed. Lue, you were loosed. Luatai, he or she, it was loosed. Luamatha, we were loosed. Luaste, you all were loosed. Luantai, they were loosed. And then remember we had this example of I pray. Prosyukamai, prosyukamai, prosyuke, prosyukatai, prosyukamatha, we pray. Prosyukeste, you all pray. Prosyukantai. So interesting, these endings are going to be added here, except in this case it's active. Just like with prosyukamai is active, even though it's taking the passive forms. So in the future, I will be is esomai. You, singular, will be is esse. He, she, it will be is estai. We will be esamatha. You all will be eseste. And they will be esantai. All right, so just a little introduction to that, just so you remember, the future of ἐμί starts with epsilon. Then you have a sigma, which usually indicates the future. We'll talk about that later. And then it has these same endings as our middle-only verbs or our active verbs that are turned passive. All right. One other thing, remember this little accent here? Instead of esamatha, it's esamatha. And that's because we don't want, in ancient Greek, we don't want the accent on anything further to the left than the third syllable. So first syllable, second syllable, third syllable, fourth syllable, that's too far. So you move it over. All right, that's why it doesn't move over when you add just two syllables, but when you add three, it has to move over. Esamatha. All right, let's go ahead and read Matthew 6, verses 22 through 24. Ha luknos tu somatos estin ha ophthalmos. Eion un ha ophthalmasu a plus halon tasomasu photenon estai. Eion de ha ophthalmasu poneros halon tasomasu skatenon estai. Un taphos ta en soi skatas estin, ta skatas pasan. Oudes dunatai dousi kurios douliuen. Egar tan hena misese, kai tan heteron agapese, henas an thexatai, kai tu heteru katefranese. Dunaste theo douliuen kai mamona. All right, let's talk about the forms of ἐμί that are in these verses. We have estin twice, and we have estai twice, and we have a twice. So first, estin. This is present, indicative, active, third person, singular. So it is he, she, or it is. So in this case, the eye is the lamp of the body. Sometimes in Greek, they'll put the subject at the end, a lot of times, whereas in English, we might do it the other way around, though it does make sense to say the lamp of the body is the eye. Generally, they translate it, the eye is the lamp of the body. But if, therefore, the eye of you, if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. So here, this is present tense, subjunctive, mood, active voice, third person singular. In this case, we switch from PIA to PSA because it's following if. So the subjunctive generally is when things aren't sure. It's not something that's actually happening. This is just a hypothetical. If your eye is clear. All right, so you use a instead of estin. All right, and then here, will be. This is your future indicative. Middle, because it has the middle ending. So don't worry about the future. The future is called middle, even though it's really an active voice. You're really being full of light. All right, so will be. Your whole body will be full of light. Photinon. And then, eonde, however, ha'athamasu pone ras in this case, if your eye is evil. So in this case, again, following if, we have the subjunctive, present subjunctive active, third person singular, a. And then your whole body will be full of darkness. So estai, will be. So estin is present, estai is future. All right, moving on to our next slide, I want to point out a lot of A's. So when you hear A, it means a lot of different things. So we already talked about the subjunctive, present subjunctive active, third person singular of ἐμί, the verb to be, has an eta with an iota subscript, a soft breathing mark, and a circumflex accent. Okay, so that's how you recognize the present subjunctive active. And you can tell from the context as well. All right, remember our present tense indicative mood active voice of to be is a as well. That's second person singular though, not third person singular. So it's a little bit different here. You are a. All right, and then we have some non-verbs. Here, the conjunction a means if. And that's epsilon iota with a soft breathing mark. So notice here we have a circumflex. So those you can tell the difference between. And then here we have the same conjunction. It usually means or, but when you have two things in a row, in English we say either or. In Greek they just say or. All right, so those are four different A's. Subjunctive, present active, third person singular. Indicative, present active, second person singular. And then the conjunction if, and then the conjunction or. All right, and a few adjectives, and we will be done with this lesson. First, let me show you, since we have these charts up here, this is our chart for the number 1. Heis, mia, hen. Henas, mias. Henas. Heni, mia. Heni. Hena, mian, hen. Those are our different ways of saying the number 1. right? Depending on how they're used in a sentence and whether you're referring to a masculine object, a feminine object, or a neuter object. Notice there's no plural, which is nice. There's only a singular one. You can't have more than one. All right, let me point out where that's used here. So either he will hate the one, and this is of course an accusative masculine singular because it's a direct object of hate. Henna. That's right here. Or he will be devoted to the one. So now with this verb here, be devoted to something, it's followed by the genitive. So that's why we have henos. All right, so that's one. What about this one? This is the number 2 in Greek. It is wonderful because it's always dua, and they call it undeclinable. So it basically doesn't decline, but I think earlier it used to decline and it just kind of went out of fashion, so to speak. But you do see do seen. Whoops, that should be an accent. Soft breathing mark. Do seen. So we do see do seen. Do seen. It sounds like do-si-do. Do seen. Here, no one is able to serve. Here's our infinitive. To serve 2 masters. In this case, after serve, you use the dative. It's like to be devoted to or to be serving to somebody. Dousi kurios. So that's an example of the exception to the rule that duo is not declined. So that's dative masculine plural. All right, so a few other, we have a plus, which is the nominative masculine singular of the word clear to describe your eye, which is nominative masculine singular. And then we have holon, which is nominative neuter singular to describe soma, which is your body, nominative neuter singular. And then we have photenon is full of light, nominative neuter singular. And then we have poneras, which is nominative masculine singular to describe your eye, nominative masculine singular. Then we have holon, your whole body. That's where we get the word whole actually in English. Holon, nominative neuter singular to match the body, which is nominative neuter singular. And then skatenon. I believe we got Scotland from this. Scotland, dark land. So far north, it doesn't see much sunlight. Besides that, it's always raining. But skatenon is dark, full of darkness. Skatia is darkness, and then another word for darkness is skatos. And then photenon, by the way, like photo, we get photography, photo, photon from the word for light, which is phos, and this is photenon, which is the adjective describing something that's full of light. So I like this, photenon, skatenon. And then we have heteron, heteru. Heteron, heteru. Notice when this on becomes oo, that accent jumps over because oo is longer and it counts as 2 syllables. So anyway, this we get hetero. So heterosexual, for example, means you're attracted to the other sex. So heteron. And then heteru is the genitive form, all right, because it's modifying or it's coming after this word, which means to despise. And that also is followed by genitive, just like this verb, anathexitai, is followed by the genitive. All right, that was a little review for you and so a few more examples of adjectives. And with that, we're going to end lesson 14. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to encourage you to keep going. We're going to go over all of these things so many times that pretty soon it will click and it will start making more sense. So hang in there and we'll see you next time.